So welcome everybody. Good Chodesh, Chodesh Tov. This is the first class in our new series on the book Pirkei Avot, which is the Mishnahs. Mishnah is a collection of rabbinic teachings edited around the year 200, the first kind of major collection of rabbinic law. But it's a very unique tractate in this collection because it is a book that has nothing to do with law and actually has to do with ethics. It has to do with how we develop ourselves as persons. It is traditional after Passover, between Passover and Shavuot, to study this book. The way I think of it, and this is kind of the framing as we're going to continue the next few weeks, is that when we cleaned Pesach, many commentators, especially Hasidic teachers, see that cleaning not just as kind of getting rid of all the bread in your house, but also has to do with trying to root inside of yourself and find what soured or spoiled parts of ourselves that we want to make notice of and to set aside and move away from. So we've kind of stripped ourselves down to the studs. We brought ourselves back to first principles. And as we progress to the holiday that celebrates the giving of the Torah, we build ourselves back up. And that's modeled by the Sfirat Omer, the counting of the Omer, in which every week, according to the Kabbalists, focuses on a different aspect of our personality. So we focus on that aspect of our personality to refashion it and to regenerate it. If you're interested in that aspect of this period, the different Sfirot, the different divine character traits, and as they reflect in our souls, feel free to check out the YouTube channel last year's learning series in this time period, in which we looked at the Sphira of each week. But this year we're looking at Pirkei Avot, in which we're going to look at the more humanistic side of this, what it means to reconstruct, refashion, refabricate even our persona and our characters, as we build ourselves up to be the people that are able, willing, capable, deserving of, worthy of receiving the Torah once more. So that's kind of the highfalutin introduction. And this is the most highfalutin class. I apologize in advance. Those of you who have learned with me before know how philosophical I tend to run. So we're going to be looking not at, we're not going to be doing going into the Mishnah per se, but we're going to be looking at the framing of what is Pirkei Avot. We will start, however, with the first Mishnah, but we're going to use it as a launching pad to ask the question of, when we talk about Pirkei Avot, what do we mean? And we're going to have a special opportunity, this is really fun in my opinion, to look at what this word avot means. If before we get into it, just if you were to translate the title, Pirkei Avot, how would you translate it? No wrong answers. Well, some answers are less wrong than others.
Yeah, ethics of our fathers.
Okay, ethics of our fathers. Definitely have seen that printed on a book. Other suggestions?
Like a parak, like the chapters of the fathers, sort of.
Okay, so what does parak mean? And why chapters? Why not words or something?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I think of a parak in terms of a chapter or a bunch of phrases together.
Sure. I mean, what comes to mind for me is
Maybe
the notion.
phrases. Yeah, maybe phrases of the fathers, sayings of the fathers. Yeah,
lefarek in Hebrew, lefarek means to break off something, and it can refer to phraseology. So maybe these are dicta, right? That makes sense. It's aphoristic work. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think maybe of Roshei Prakim, right? Of the chapter headings, which is a way that you use to refer to kind of the major principles, right? The categories that you're working with, and then we're kind of getting deeper into it. I see in the chat Sterling suggesting that wisdom of our ancestors. So right, kind of interrogating also the gendered nature of fathers versus maybe a more kind of a broad term or something that's less parental, maybe more lineage oriented or descendant oriented. Both that suggestion and Ben's kind of make let's say the substantive change. Pirkei means chapters, like Lauren's right, or aphorisms, right? That's correct literally. But functionally speaking, it does mean wisdom of our ancestors, wisdom of the rabbis, wisdom of our parents, our spiritual parents. And we're going to be looking at that. So what is wisdom, I think, is a question that is very interesting to me. It's different than intelligence. It's different than smarts. It's even different, I would even say, maybe than morality. Right? Wisdom has something particular to it that I think that this text is trying to communicate and this text is trying to instantiate. So we're going to get into that as well. So all these suggestions are great. Again, a panoply of correct answers. I love it. There's maybe a better way of putting it before. There's no one correct answer. That I will hold by. That I am very happy to hold by. Okay, so let's dive in. Wisdom is the sight description of how things could be or are. Aha. It's the sight of how things could be or are. Okay, wow. Okay, so it is existential. It is perceptive. Versus, it's not knowledge, right? That's like facts you have in your head or something, but rather it is a mode of clarity, of being able to map your mind to the world outside of you. Okay, we're going to look at that. I think that's a very interesting suggestion because the question, maybe one of the questions, is that static or is that dynamic, right? Is that something that stays fixed or is that something that emerges, right, as new things present themselves to you? And all these possibilities are out there. Froth of possibilities. So let's get into it. I'm going to share my screen, so let me know if you see it. Do you see it? Excellent. Oh, no spoilers. Okay, good. Okay, so Pirkei Avot, my own subtitles, I love giving subtitles, is person or principle. And we're going to see what that suggests very soon, I hope. But to me, it's very exciting. One moment, let me just see more of you in the little box. Excellent. Okay. So Susie suggests that wisdom has something experiential to it in terms of, I think, something you learn from living life and something that you also are able to bring into your living of life. It is not just theoretical, it's practical, and has to do with that which life teaches you. Great. Great suggestion. Okay, so let's look at this first Mishnah. So Mishnah is both the name of this, this text from around 200 CE, and also each of its units is also called a Mishnah. So let's look at this first Mishnah. It says, Moshe kibel Torah mi Sinai. Moses received the Torah from Sinai. Umsara li Yehoshua, and transmitted it to Joshua, his disciple. V'Yoshua lizkenim, and Joshua transmitted it to the 70 elders, right, who were his his members of parliament, right. Uzkenim nevi'im, and the elders transmitted it to the prophets, right, who were the religious instructors during the settlement of Canaan. Unvi'im misarua anshe knesset hagdolah, and the prophets transmitted it to the called the Men of the Great Assembly, or the Great Synagogue, which is some kind of, parliamentary body around the time of the Persian period, so somewhere in the 6th to 5th centuries BCE. And it was kind of this, kind of proto-Sanhedrin, right? Sanhedrin is the great rabbinic court that made legislative and policy decisions for the rabbinic period, and this is seen as kind of the precedent for that, right? A body of around 400, if I remember, elders, sages, etc., who made decisions. The tradition sees them as responsible for putting together at least the first version of the Siddur, right, of the Jewish prayer book. Okay, so they served this kind of parliamentary body of sorts. Okay, so that's what's called the chain of transmission, or a Mesorah, right? You might hear that term used around, Mesorah. It's usually taken to mean kind of like the Jewish tradition writ large, but I want to kind of focus on the linguistics. You can't have philosophy or mysticism without grammar. Mesorah, or limsor, which we saw means to transmit something. Interestingly, because it means to hand something over. Now, the Latin word tradition, or traditio, means something very similar, because it actually comes from the same root as transmit. Means to pass something down. So the word Kabbalah, right, also means reception. We're going to talk about receive the Torah. But Mesorah and Kabbalah are very similar because they are things that you are handed by somebody else. You receive from someone else. It's a chain of transmission. This is a genealogy, right, of Torah. what's the story that's being told here? If you were just to kind of reduce it, give me the Rashi Prakim, give me the chapter headings. What's the headline here if you were to write a newspaper article?
Transmission of the Torah.
Okay, this is the Torah is transmitted, meaning what? What is that? What is implied by that?
It's implied that it goes from one person to the other. It's a teaching chain.
Okay, so it goes from one person to another. We're going to see actually that literal phrase show up later in a commentary. Me'ish le'ish, from person to person. So Torah is interpersonal.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, often people, when learning this Mishnah, focus on the origin, right? This is proving, right? There's a book called Permission to Receive by Kemmelman, if I remember correctly. And this is an argument made most famously by Yehuda Levi in his book, The Kuzari, in the Middle Ages. That kind of like, this authorizes the Torah. Authorizes, right? We know who the author is because we have a chain of transmission that goes all the way back to the source. Right? What's the source? Sinai. Moses received it from Sinai, right? Mipi hagvura, from the mouth of the mighty, i.e. directly from God. And then transmitted it to Joshua. Joshua transmitted it to the elders. But I want to actually take William James's encouragement that we look not to the roots, but to the fruits. That the origin is important, yes, but so is the process that's being described. That Torah is not something that stands on its own. It is not something that is derived from first principles, but even at its very origin, it was something handed over. Torah is born of relationships. It can only be communicated. Another word that means to pass something over. Like you think of Lahavdil Elef Havdalas, to communicate a disease, or a communicable disease. Communication also means to transmit from one to another. Torah, even at its very origin, is not something that just appears out of nowhere, but rather is handed over from one to another, from God to Moses, and then from human to human on down. It's turtles all the way down. Susie suggests something about broken telephone. We're going to bracket that. That's a whole other question about the, that's very much the permission to receive question. But that's a good intuition. Now, we're really going to focus on this framing more than we're going to actually focus on the actual first content. But I do want to say the content because we will get back to it. So here's the first teaching we get, right? So Moses received the Torah from Sinai, to the Anshe Knesset Hagadola. They said, right, 3 teachings. They gave over 3 teachings. Havu mitunim badin, be moderate in judgment, or patient. V'ha'amidu talmidim harbe, set up, establish many disciples, students. V'asu siag LaTorah, and make a fence for the Torah. Now, the first reaction is that what does one of this genealogy of Torah have to do at all with these kind of seemingly random, and in Lauren's term, aphorisms, right? What does this framing mechanism have anything to do with these aphorisms? Now, it might just be, hey, here's the authorization of Anshe Knesset Hagadola. They can prove their pedigree. We received the Torah indirectly from Moses, who received it from God. And thus we are authorized to give over this teaching. And here's a record of the teaching. I think there's something more there, but we're going to get to it later. So we're just going to put a pin in that. Boop. And we're going to move on down the line. All right, now here's I love this teaching. It's so neat. So this is from the Talmud. Now the Talmud is the working out of the Mishnah. It is from the period after the Mishnah, from around 200 to around 700 CE, by the next cadre of rabbis called the Amoraim, or that's kind of the new actors on the scene. And then it was redacted and edited by editors after that. But here comes a very interesting. We're gonna take a little bit of a left turn. Okay, so here's this teaching. It says Tanu Rabbanan. They're quoting an older Tanaitic teaching. It says Chasidim Harishonim Hayu Matzniim Kotzotehem Uzechu Kiotehem Betoch Sedotehem Uma'amikin Lahem Gimel Tfachim Kedei Shelo Yakev HaMachrisha. The early pious. Now the Chasidim. Nowadays, you think of a chassid, you think of a big fur hat, dancing in the streets, etc., etc. But the word chassid means somebody who goes above and beyond, somebody who takes their piety very seriously. Now, what's the root of the word chassid? Chesed, exactly. I saw the lips. Chesed, and chesed means kindness, love. Exactly. This is someone who's like impassioned, obsessed with, infatuated with God, with being a Jew, right? With doing the right and the good. That they're so impassioned, consumed, that they are willing to go beyond what they need to do. It's what's called lifnim mishurat hadin. Right? They embody what's called midat chasidut. Right? So beyond what you just need to do, what's required of you, but rather what you devote yourself, you commit yourself to do. So what would these early pious do? These kind of proto-mystics, let's say, of the early rabbinic period? They would bury their thorns, right, after they would trim their hedges. You go and you have the hedge trimmer. They would take their thorns and their pieces of glass, like let's say they accidentally broke a piece of glass or ceramics or something in their house. And what would they do? They would bury it 3 handsbreadths in the ground. Why? It says explicitly, it doesn't always, but here it's explicitly saying so that plows would not be damaged. Okay, what's the deal here? Rav Sheshet takes it even farther. Rav Sheshet, who's, he's down the Rhine, but fine. Rav Sheshet, he would burn it. He would burn the thorns and burn the glass or the ceramic shards, etc. And Rava would throw them in the river, right? I.e., like in the dump, or flush them away in the toilet, let's say, right? They would make sure they were totally gone. What's the deal? What characterizes a chassid? You could have thought, what? This is what's called a havamina. You could have thought that being a pious Jew would mean what?
In this case, it's being extremely ethical and considerate of other people. And
Give me the havamina first, though. Give me the havamina first. What might you have thought? It's the rabbis. What do the rabbis want you to do?
Okay, you might have thought like they were people who went to minyan every, 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And they were really, really medactic about every mitzvah that they could possibly do.
Mm-hmm.
But really, according to this, it's about people who have so much consideration for others and who care so much that they wouldn't, like even an object like a plow, they wouldn't want to damage the plow. Not to mention the person running the plow who'd also probably be hurt. But this is showing like exceptional chesed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So yeah, and I saw Nisim offered like, they might be doing constant inner work. And like, okay, maybe that's getting closer. Like piety has to do with something spiritual about perfecting your soul. But for the rabbis, Amy, yeah?
Well, I think it's examples of building a fence around the Torah.
Oh. Say more.
Well, it would have been enough to just conceal their thorns, but they also dug down 3 handbreadths, and then, so one guy did that, then the next guy puts them in the fire, then the next guy puts them in the river. Like they're doing increasing rings around the actual law.
Okay. And these rings are, in terms of giving themselves a higher standard that they need to meet?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, that makes a lot of, so, and you associate with the fence around the Torah. I want to push that a little bit and suggest, so yeah, like it could be right, like Lauren suggested. Oh, they're like steiging a Blat Gemurah every day, right? Or they're going to Minyan, they're davening for 3 hours, or like Nisim's offering a more like kind of spiritual reading, constant inner work, right? But like, and there's a lot of religions which are about perfecting yourself, and we're going to talk about that later. But the rabbis in the Talmud do not let your self-work forget the other. What distinguishes a chassid from just, let's say, a rabbi, anyone could be a rabbi, who needs it? But what makes a chassid special is that they want to make sure no one else is harmed by them. And that's, we're going to get to that in a second. But also, and here's the siag point that I really appreciate that comment you made, Amy, is that I think also, besides maybe providing a higher standard for themselves, they're protecting the Torah because it shouldn't be the case that you regard a Torah life as one that gives you license to allow others to be disadvantaged or to even be hurt. Right? They want to make sure to protect the Torah's reputation or the way Torah is regarded. I don't think just as PR, but really, what does it mean to live a Torah life? Oh, it's one in which you want to make sure that it never becomes accidental permission to allow others to be disadvantaged. You need to protect its reputation is the wrong term, but you protect its quality. You protect its substance. Amy, you raising your hand or stretching?
Yeah, both. Why
don't you just make sure you use the raise hand button in case that you don't show up in the little screen. I don't see you.
Oh, okay, no problem. I just think it's actually very interesting because you could say, with the rings or the fence around the Torah, you could say they're just being very legalistic. But actually, what it says here is, if you want to be pious, you have to actualize the matters of nizikin, which is damages.
No spoilers. Yeah.
Sorry, we're not there yet.
No, fine. But complete your thought, though.
I'm just thinking that, in fact, they're being the opposite of legalistic by doing what you said, like actually saying it's not enough to just, follow the letter of the law, but actually you have to make sure people aren't hurt.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think another way also like of adding color to that is that it's not what presents for them their new obligation is considering the emergent needs of others. Right? The data that their neighbors provide, i.e., oh, this is what they need. They plow at this time, right? And this is the distance I need to dig into the ground to make sure their plow isn't damaged. Or chas v'shalom, they step on one of these things and get, I don't know, actually a friend of mine like stepped on this piece of pottery and it was like lodged in her foot and it like caused all kinds of ache and pain and awful things, right? It's a real thing that they're being concerned about, or getting a glass splinter in you, right? That's awful. So they're letting the needs of their neighbors, of their fellow, dictate the way that they behave. It's not set in stone, but rather it is learned from life. So let's get to this thing. What does it mean? What does it take to be a chassid? What it takes to be a chassid is to, you'd think again, what would you be passionate about? What would you be obsessing over? Oh, you'd be learning all of the Torah. Sure, fine. But what part of the Torah makes you a chassid? So Rav Yehuda says, Haiman de'ba'ay l'mahave chasida l'kayim milei d'nezikin. Rav Yehuda says, anyone who wants to become a chassid needs to fulfill, needs to actualize, needs to become bucky, like an expert in the matters of nizikin. Now, nizikin is an entire section of the Mishnah of the Talmud. It has to do with interpersonal damages, torts, right, as they call it in law. Now, you can think of that either literally, in terms of or literarily, that's the section of the Talmud they need to know, or you can think of it just topically, right? You need to be concerned with what it means to think about interpersonal damages. Rava says, and here comes why we're learning this book and not, let's say, the Mishnahs of Bava Kama all week, is Rava says, Milei Avot. So no, if you want to become a chassid, you need to actualize, become expert in the words of Avot. Of Avot, right? That's Pirkei Avot is what he's gesturing to. But I want to also, again, leave Avot open, like we had that kind of more open translation of avot from before in the framing conversation we had. I want to get back to why you have to think about avot in terms of what it means to situate yourself that kind of way. And last but not least, some say that instead of avot, he really meant to say brachot. And brachot is the first section of the Talmud and has to do with the laws of prayer. Now, what's funny is that it seems to be kind of a bit of a deviation, right? Because, nizikin is about interpersonal damages, torts. Avot is about ethics. Also, kind of we think of interpersonal stuff. Brachot, though, brings in what's called bein adam l'makom, right? Laws that are centered on the relationship we have, mediated by prayer with God. And that seems to be interesting, right? Because maybe piety isn't about caring for others. Piety isn't about letting the needs of your fellow dictate your behavior. But rather it is about constant inner work. It is about meditating and like transcending the world. It's a provocation of sorts. Here comes a very interesting correction or intervention in that. So this is from the Rashba. Shlomo ben Adret, who was a disciple of the Ramban of Nachmanides. So 13th century Spanish rabbi. And this is what he says in his commentary on this section of the Talmud. It says, there are those who interpret that each of these three suggestions are actually, all of them are about nizikin. They're all about interpersonal damage or harm. How so? Ha de chasidim arishonim matzniin, right? That's so literally we have the literal interpretation of nizikin. How? They made sure to bury their shards and their thorns to make sure no one would get hurt or their property wouldn't get damaged or someone's livelihood would be obstructed. Right? Think of it that way also, right? If it damages the plow, think about somebody living in subsistence agriculture. That's like, let's say, a whole day, a whole week where they have to take their plow to the plow guy to get the plow fixed. And then, they're not going to have food for their family. They're not going to have food to bring to the market. Their whole livelihood is interrupted, right? So it's not just like property damage, but rather it's about obstruction of livelihood. All right, so literal torts, not hurting somebody, not interrupting, obstructing their livelihood. Fine. But why avot? How is avot about damages? Isn't it about character perfection? Isn't that what we think it is? No. Ha'omer shali shalcha v'shalcha shalcha chasid. Later on in avot, there's a Mishnah that says, and it is about relation to property. It says, somebody who says, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, that's either the normal person or, very interestingly, it's what the Sodomites would say, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, that they would say, not like, give me all your stuff, what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine, but they would actually say, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, never the twain shall meet, everyone is their own little silo, no one has to do with anybody else. A society of radical individualism, no sense of the social, no sense of community. That's Sodom. But who's the chassid? The chassid is somebody who says, what's mine is yours, and what's yours is yours. Somebody who is willing to forego personal inconvenience or even loss for the sake of someone else's benefit or well-being. Right? Who does not have attachment to possession, but rather towards ensuring that their resources are distributed in a way in which as many people as possible are helped. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is yours. Now you could think, oh, that person's just going to be, they're going to be a rook, they're going to be a mook, they're going to be just snookered, all kinds of 1930s slang. But I think the key here, right, is that avot, and this is, if we're all supposed to learn avot, ideally, if we're all looking out for each other in the same kind of way, then it becomes a network of mutual aid, right? It becomes a way in which everyone is making sure that everyone, those who have can provide and those who need can take. There's a certain Jew who said something along those lines with a beard. Moving on, here comes the scandal though. But brachot, right? How are the laws of blessings, the laws of prayer? How is that about damage or harm? It says, Chasidim Arishonim, this is a famous teaching from Masechet Brachot. It says the early pious, same guys it seems, would meditate or wait for an hour before praying. Now, how is that a teaching that has to do with concern about harm? I don't have an answer. I have some ideas, but there's no answer here. It's just left hanging. We're the answer, right? The Anshe Knesset Gedola passed it to us. Now it's our turn. It's been transmitted. So what comes to mind? That the early pious would meditate or wait, literally wait, but it implies they would like sit, still, hold their consciousness, etc., and wait for an hour before they prayed. It says also they would actually do that after they prayed too. They would wait for an hour, pray for an hour, then meditate for an hour. Renee, you're disapproving of this.
I'm just trying to form my thought.
Okay.
I think that isn't there this idea that you should, like when you're praying, you should have proper kavanah.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't, then isn't that some sort of infringement? Like when you're praying to Hashem, and you're like kind of in the background thinking about other things, it's like infringing on your time with Hashem. So in order to get ready for, to have proper kavanah when you're praying, wouldn't it make sense to meditate for that hour and then get ready, and then you're like completely focused, and then you're I don't really know how that relates to damages though.
Well, the infringement, yes, I hear, yes, right?
The infringement on, the infringement on like on your time when you're supposed to be focused. So I guess that would, I guess that's how that relates. I don't know.
Okay, so you see it as a kind of like, infringement on your time, right? Maybe even on, right, the Rambam and the Talmud, you say some of the Talmud, right? When you pray, you imagine yourself as if approaching, right, the sovereign in their, in their halls and their palace, and you come with that kind of dignity, right? So in a way, you're denigrating yourself if you see prayer as just something you kind of get out of the way or what have you. Okay, that's great. I want to hold that because I want to come back to that suggestion too. Anyone else have their ideas? No pressure. Yes.
Yeah, kind of along the same lines of Renee. Like I was thinking, like if you, excuse me, you have to sort of clear
your throat.
Any of, like, if you're having like negative thoughts, if you're thinking like if you're angry at someone or you're upset or something, that's not the state you should be going in to pray. And then that also, but by doing that, it usually helps you to not feel those feelings towards people anymore. And so it kind of flips the story for you.
You wake up on the wrong side of the bed. You are grumpy as a cat, right? As a grumpy cat. And you bring that negative energy into your praying. And like, let's say it, results in, it vibes out, and someone, you're not praying for somebody's well-being. Susie, that's very intuitive. It says actually the halacha is the law, the Jewish law, is that if you have an issue with somebody in the community, it's called broigus, right? You have like an unresolved issue with somebody in the community, you're not allowed to serve as a shaliach tzibur, as a prayer facilitator during the high holy days. Because you cannot be relied on to pray for the well-being or to facilitate the prayer of the well-being of everyone in the community. You need to be reliably present, reliably available, reliably on people's side. You are their defense counsel, effectively, approaching God and arguing their case for them. And if you're not, if you have a conflict of interest, right, then ethics requires you to recuse. You cannot serve as the prayer leader. So here, right, it's saying every day is Yom Kippur, in the sense that the early pious would make sure that they would have their mind in order, right, have their consciousness settled, so that when they pray, they're able to pray with, beneficence, right, kindness, well-being for all. Great point. It's Renee, Susie, both of you, great points. I want to tweak both of those. I think that's like kind of, okay, we have harm to yourself lo aleinu, where you have harm to others through prayer, Rahman al-Litzlan. I think also, like, as monotheists, no one turn me in. God cannot be harmed. God is perfect. God, et cetera, et cetera. But I think another element that can be maybe damaged is maybe not God, obviously, but rather our relationship with God could also be damaged. Right? In the sense of like seeing prayer as something that we just slide into, something we don't take seriously, and something that I think Renee's quite right, can then denigrate our own dignity. Or Susie's quite right in terms of what it means to treat lightly this potential to have a positive impact in the world and maybe even, chas v'shalom, a negative impact. But here too, I think bringing back our original framing, Torah is relational. Torah is about relationships, that we have a relationship, right? Prayer is situating us in this relationship, a relationship with God, relationship with others, relationship with ourselves. And all three of those connections are able to be damaged, right? If we are not settling ourselves, realizing what, this moment could entail or should entail. Yeah, Renee.
I think that the meditation, to go back to Amy's point, is that it puts a fence around prayer, sort of. When you have that hour, there's a definite divide between, okay, this is like me in the world, and now this is me in like prayer mode, or like, with my relationship with Hashem. So I think that it's definitely a fence to take time, that meditation period.
Okay, great. And maybe bringing back, so excellent connecting the dots. Classes, it makes me very happy, right? So like, yeah, I'll connect that, but if y'all are connecting with each other, I'm thrilled. But to that point, right, is that, again, going back to the notion of lifnim mishurat hadin. Lifnim mishurat hadin is often translated as going beyond the requirement, beyond the letter of the law. But actually, literally, it's not what it means. Again, you need the grammar. Lifnim means within. Mishurat hadin means actually what one is allowed, what the law allows you, the legal license. So lifnim mishurat hadin means you're actually giving up what you actually have right to. Because Torah isn't about permission. Torah is about wisdom. It's about judiciousness. You taking full advantage of what you are legally or legalistically involved, or what you are legalistically allowed, again, then, could result in, that's somebody else's problem. That's a YP, not a my P, right? That's a your problem, not my problem. If I don't have to throw away my shards, you should watch out when you plow. That's not my problem. But rather, if I think, okay, I'm going to predict, right, what it is somebody else needs from me, and make sure to incorporate that into my life, I lose time, I lose intention, I lose energy. I'm giving those things to that other person. I'm giving my time, I'm giving my consideration, right? So similarly here, I'm giving my time, right? I'm taking an hour out of my, this is a high standard. This is the early pies. If you don't take an hour before you daven every morning, you can still be a chassid, don't worry. But I'm going to take an hour before I daven to make sure that I have my mind settled and I'm able to forego, right, what improper prayer could look like. I'm taking that hour to make sure that I'm able to have the maximum potential good manifest in the world. Shkayach. Excellent. The chat. Generosity is a great way of framing it, Sterling. Yes, generosity. Actually, and that's a term used by the Rav, by Soloveitchik in his commentating on this, actually. I didn't include that, but your intuition's quite right. It is about giving of something, right? That's why I love to translate korban, not as sacrifice, but as offering, right? It is something you are giving of yourself to God, to others, etc. So great, generosity from yourself to others, anticipating others' needs. Beautiful. Okay. We move right along. Any just comments or concerns before we move to the next text? Okay, great. We can always go back to it. So the Meiri is what we call a technical term in rabbinics, a treat, in the sense that the Meiri was unknown for a long, long time. People knew of him. He was quoted by others of his commentators. He is a 14th century, I think, Spanish commentator on the Talmud. He wrote an almost complete commentary on the Talmud. But we didn't have it, and they were only able to find it, recently-ish in the last couple hundred years, if I remember correctly. So the fact that, and it's also written in like very lucid, beautiful Hebrew. So if your Hebrew is good, it's like one of these things that like if you have modern Hebrew, maybe not like Talmud Hebrew, this is a great commentary to learn. So it's a good, something to aspire to. It's gorgeous language, but it's long, so I'm gonna leave the Hebrew to the side. We're gonna look at it in the English, and please trust my translation. So he says, before we begin to explain, to commentate on the tractate, Pirkei Avot, it's fitting to meditate on the reason it starts with this order of transmission, right? The Masorah, the transmission from Moses to Joshua, to the men of the Great Assembly. Person to person. Person to person. Remember that phrase from before? Person to person. Me ish, le ish. Virali, and it seems to me, that the answer, why do we start with this Masorah, is that it had to have been done for the sake of the status of the tractate, i.e. to like endorse the tractate, right? To provide the authorization that it needed to show how important Pirkei Avot is. Why? Since the ideas found in Pirkei Avot are not scriptural proofs derived from rabbinic hermeneutics or exegeses, right? A lot of the Talmud is derived from the Torah, right? The Torah says this, and then I expand on it to bring out its implications in this way or that way, and that's how you know it's for real. Pirkei Avot, well, a lot of the Mishnah doesn't, interestingly, but let's just bracket that for a second. Pirkei Avot does not cite the Chumash, largely. It does not authorize itself. Right? It doesn't prove itself. It doesn't provide a proof text. It's just rabbis saying things that they think is right. So why should we trust them? Aha! We trust them because we have the pedigree. We have the chain of transmission. That it goes back to a reliable source, God. He says, rather, it's the standalone encouragement of character traits that should be dear to us, and the warning away of character traits that are distasteful, since they do not map to a more traditional rabbinic presentation, right? Because Pirkei Avot doesn't look like regular rabbinic teachings, in which they, again, provide proof texts from the Torah and da-da-da-da-da. One could think, then, that this is just theoretical, that the praiseworthy traits are not the stuff of mitzvah. Okay, the rabbis give us ethical teachings, but it's not the core of Torah. Real Torah is, I don't know. What's real Torah? Keeping Shabbos. I don't know, yeah, like making sure that you don't, dig a hole on Shabbat or something. That's real Torah. Ethics, it's frippery. It's frosting. It's, what's it called? Like the fondant, right? It's just like, it's just decorative. It's not the core of Torah. It's not gufa mitzvah. And unethical behavior, that would, it's just frippery. It's not the core of sin. Again, this is what's called a havamina. You might think that because this shows up without proof texts, that it's just ancillary. But no. Ethics, Pirkei Avot, is about the core of Torah. That's why it gives you the pedigree of the transmission of Torah in the beginning. Because this, too, is Torah. Ethics is just as important as the laws. Okay? Yeah, Susan.
Is it possible that the reason they didn't quote Torah to prove what they were saying is that it was so obvious? Like, why would you need us to prove this? Like, this is what the whole book's about, kind of thing.
Yeah. You have support. There's the great grandson of the Chasam Sofer, who goes by the name the fourth generation, the Dor Revi. Why? Because he's the fourth generation from the Chasam Sofer. We talk about anxiety of influence. So the Dor Revi basically says, in a sense, there's a basis of human dignity that undergirds the Torah. It's unspoken, but it's assumed. So that's kind of like that's kind of the line that you're gesturing to. Very, very possible. And the Meiri is trying to anticipate that by saying, because we don't have, let's say, a formalistic authorization of each teaching, right? It's quoted in the Chumash, it's quoted in that, quoted in this. Then you might think it's just opinions or whatever. But no, this is the core of Torah too. Yeah, Lauren.
But within Torah, I mean, if you look at Tanakh, we have wisdom teachings. Mishlei is wisdom teaching.
Sure.
Kohelet is wisdom teaching.
Sure.
You know, it does exist. I don't think this is so far out of the norm to give a wisdom teaching.
Right. But
Just
not
about.
right, like the Nevi'im and Ketuvim, right? The
the
non-Torah
Ketuvim.
parts of Tanakh have
Yeah,
a
the Ketuvim.
have a weaker status vis-a-vis Torah.
Okay.
Right? Right. Torah is core. The Nach stuff is used as support. And we have certain mitzvos which are grounded in Nach, but they're seen as what's from Kabbalah, from tradition. That's different from Masorah. Right? So here, Meiri is pushing on that and saying, no, wisdom is not just ancillary. It's not just opinions. It's not just op-eds. But it's core of Torah. Right? That's the intervention he's making.
Okay.
Okay, so thus, and here we get to the focus on Avot, which is where I wanted to get to linguistically. These matters needed to be organized systematically to make known that they are clear principles derived from the sages of old, received from the mouth of prophecy, one person to another, me'ish la'ish, from relationships, to show its elegance clearly to the eye. I was thinking of putting this in like dots, but this is just so beautiful. I want to say in the Hebrew. Kedei la'ayin bahem ba'ein hahidur, so that the eye sees its elegance and beauty. L'habit el tzur chotzavo, that's bonkers. So the rock sees the one who hewed it. Ve'el makevet bor no crow, and so the hole can see who dug it. What poetry! Gorgeous stuff. I.e., again, undergirding the relational principle. That wisdom, these wisdom teachings, are principles that are derived from a heritage, right? From a tradition going back to prophecy, i.e., what was communicated directly from God. That these things have equal status to Torah in that way. But also, and I think it also implies this interpersonal element that no one is independent. Every rock is hewn, every hole is dug. Right? Everything has someone who brought it to bear. Avot. Right? Avot, the parental sense of avot. Avot means parents. Right? We're all made from something. And now we're going to kind of expand on that, what avot can mean. Now, the basic principle is hinted at in the name of the book, Avot. Ha! See, it's useful if you put the source sheet together, you know where it's going. The basic principle is found in the name Avot. That is, that there are these are the principles that emerged from the architects, Avot, of the world. The pillars on which the house of Torah is founded. Okay, so maybe back to what Susie was getting at. What are these principles that Avot are teaching us? What's the metaphor it uses?
Pillars, like the
Pillars,
basic
good. Load-bearing beams, right? Anyone who's done renovations, Renee, anyone who's done renovations knows you cannot knock out a load-bearing beam. It might not be the frame itself, but without these pillars, right, these foundational supports, the house falls down. Torah can't exist without these rooted foundations, right? You can't have Torah without ethics. Now I'm very proud of this little linguist. I'm a little pat myself on the back. I hope you appreciate it too. So I translate Avot here as architects of the world, and here, or Avot can be understood as the matters which are the archetypes. Architects, archetypes. Okay. The archetypes, the bases, root, and foundational principles for all wisdom and obligation. the path and way to any virtue, as was indicated above. Anyone who wanted to be a chassid needs to learn avot. So what it says, you need to learn avot to be a chassid. What did the Gemara mean? According to the Meiri, you need to know the architects and you need to know the archetypes. You need to know not just the principles, and this is, I think, really key. Not just the principles of wisdom, because we saw before, the chassid is not just like a robot, an ethics robot that takes like principle A and plugs it into situation B, but rather wisdom is learned interpersonally, it's learned experientially. Wisdom is learned from relationships. So it's not just principles, the archetypes, but it's also the architects. It's also the teachers that you learn from, or the experiences that teach you. There's a relational element to wisdom. Important, I think here, Meiri doesn't get this notion of avot as a principle from or archetype from nowhere. In, just Amy, 1 second. In laws of Shabbat and also in laws of damages. Whoa! There's avot. There's archetypes. There's general categories. And then under the avot are what's called toldot, secondary categories, derived categories. So there's the 39 avot malacha, 39 archetypal categories of labor that you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. And then under those 39 categories, then there's derived subcategories under them. For instance, one of the major categories, you're not allowed to grind on Shabbat. So like imagine milling flour or grinding coffee or something like that. You're not allowed to do on Shabbat. And then Rashi says, and derived from grinding is what he says in French, mincer, which means to mince. You're not allowed to chop something finely, which is when, if you go to a certain houses on Shabbat, you'll see that salads are made, either like with large pieces, or like cut coarsely, or even sometimes ripped apart, as a way, again, of kind of, fence around the Torah. So that's avot in Shabbat. But in damages, there's also 4 avot of damages. Fire, pit, ox, and... what's the 4th one? I forget. But there's 4 major categories of damage. I should have done my research. 4 major categories of damage. But under those 4 categories again, right? So when he says avot, he's bringing this from a real, rabbinic terminology. That it's not just parent. It refers to structures and architects of said structures. It's the people who conjure these or design, and also the major features thereof. Yeah, Amy.
This is maybe off topic, so I'm sorry if we don't have time. It's fine. I'm just curious. That you're talking about if you want to be a chassid. I'm just thinking to myself, like, shouldn't ethics be for everyone? Like, not everyone is going to be a chassid, right? Why? Is it just this commentary that's focusing on that? Or like, I have a struggle with it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, right? So we have this super erogatory category of chassid, right? Of this like higher standard that is not what's required of every. For instance, if you know that somebody needs bone marrow, or needs needs a lobe of liver, are you required to donate your liver? No, the halacha does not say you are required to hurt yourself, even for someone else's well-being, because that is too much to ask of somebody. That would be like requirement. However, midat chassidut, right? The standard, the higher standard of the chassid would be to donate your liver, kidney, etc. Okay, so like here we have like what's reasonable or even let's say fair to expect of anyone, and then what is an aspirational standard that people set for themselves. So yes, the chassid is not is your average Josephina. That's true. But on the other hand, we have here the slide between what does it mean to aspire, right? Everyone, even Joe, Safina Shmo, Safina, everyone should be in some way still aspiring in their life. Does that mean they're required to do everything aspirational? No, but everyone should be trying to be as good as they can be. And that means different things for different people. So you're quite right. The chassid is not anybody, but ethics has to do with setting a certain kind of new benchmark that we hopefully approach if we don't always reach. Great point. Great point. Okay. I'm actually going to skip that because we're going to get to that later. Okay. Oh, actually. Right. Okay. So here we have another teaching from the Talmud. I'm going to lower your hand down if that's okay. So Rabbi Yochanan says, quoting Rabbi Shimon Yochai, says, the service of Torah is greater than studying Torah. What does he mean by service? He says, Elisha ben Shaphat, who was the disciple of Eliyahu Hanavi, right, Elijah the prophet, who poured the water over Elijah's hands. So Elisha took care of Elijah, bathed him, right, poured water on his hands to prepare him for service, to cleanse his hands. Very intimate, caring act, right? Imagine what the Levites do for the Kohanim, or what we, beautifully do in that way. Okay, so it does not say he studied from Elijah or he learned from Elijah. Rather, it says that he poured water, right? He cared for him. This teaches us implicitly that serving Torah is greater than its study. Service is greater than study. We call it the notion of like Gedol Ma'aseh Mi Talmud, right? That deed is greater than action. But here, it's something very important. Serving Torah is greater than its study. Now, what's the slide that's subtly done here? What's being served when Elisha pours the waters on Elijah's hands?
Kindness.
Yes, okay, kindness is being manifest. That is definitely true. But I mean to say, what's the object of care here? Like, who's being cared for, or what's being cared for?
Isn't it giving kavod from Elisha to Eliyahu? Because Eliyahu would have been the prophet before him and the great prophet. So
Right.
Elisha was showing kavod to Eliyahu for his position.
Okay, yes, it's definitely a sign of respect to one's teacher.
It's like what a Levi does to a Kohen,
Mhm.
right? I mean, this is, something that's very integral.
Right, but the key to point here, right? So there's it's an offering, right? Generosity is the language from Sterling before. It's an offering for somebody to another. It's caring, an act of caring, right? But I mean, what's key here, right, is that service of Torah is not donating new benches to the yeshiva, right? Service of Torah is not, sponsoring the next edition of the Talmud. Service of Torah is what?
This is being a dumb. This is from one person to another.
Torah is embodied in the human being. Service of Torah is care for another, and not just another, but also the source of Torah. Right? That the one's teacher is not just, let's say an expert in their field, but is embodying what it is that you're learning. We're going to get to this really beautiful like text-person nexus soon. But the key here, right, that service of Torah is just as Torah is relational. So Sterling's invoking the famous one-liner from Abraham Joshua Heschel that when he marched in Selma, he said he was praying with his feet. That Torah is not just something that is theoretical. It's not just something that is studious. Torah is something that is actualized. But key here, I really want to say, and also relational, interpersonal, right? Interentity. That service of Torah is care for another, and also an intimate act, right? There's something very intimate about bathing somebody, right? Washing his hands. It is a caring. I mean, imagine like a nurse, right? Like caring for a patient, right? Washing is a tender gesture. So that's the example that's given for service of Torah. Yes, kavod, Lauren, you're totally right. But kavod can be very like rigid or very removed. So this is something that's close. That's care of Torah, and it's greater than just it's greater than learning. I mean, interestingly, it also like the agent in this situation is actually the disciple, not the master. Right? It's not that the master is giving over Torah, but rather the student, through providing an act of care, is taking agency, right, in terms of what it means to actualize Torah. It is reciprocal to Sterling's comment in the chat as well, right? It's not just that you're receiving Torah from your master. You are then in turn providing care to the teacher. Yes, Steve.
Just a quick question.
Please.
Isn't this phrase, in the context that it's given in Kings, in Malachim, that Elisha was so close to Shaphat, he poured water over his hands, meaning that he was the kind of person that was close to Elisha, and that expression means that he had learned from Elisha, and that's why they went to him. And in the context that it's recited in Kings, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for somebody who has that kind of spirituality, and they're assuming that because he poured water, he was that close to him, so that he was imbued with that learning and so on. So it's an expression. Now, I guess what I'm asking is, so how are we taking it from that context to this context is what I'm trying to deal with.
Right. So that's a great point. So it's not in the moment. It's not describing Elisha washing Elijah's hands, but rather in referring to Elisha, he is identified not as the student of Elijah, not as the disciple of Elijah, not as the one who learned all of Elijah's Torah, but rather, let's bring Elisha, the one who washed his hands, which means that must be more important of a reference than saying he's studied from Elijah. It's more important, it's greater to say that he served Elijah, or Eliyahu. And you're quite right, Steve. I think it does bespeak the quality of that relationship. There's intimacy in what it means to be a master and disciple. I think, unfortunately, we've seen a lot of stories recently in terms of ways that intimate relationship, that potential power relationship or imbalance can be exploited or taken advantage of. But that's the key intervention of the Chassid. That what it really means to be in this relationship is to put the other first. If I'm a teacher and I am focused on blowing somebody's mind all the time, or I'm focused on generating a certain kind of magical relationship or whatever, that's really just me, right? That's my egotism. And that often someone is lost, someone gets caught in the crossfire. Or even worse, if I take advantage of that charismatic position and use that charisma towards someone's ill ends. Awful. That is the complete betrayal of what this intimacy is supposed to be. That I, as a teacher, you as a teacher, right, provide others opportunities to develop their agency, to develop themselves, to take charge of their position. Elisha washes Elijah's hands, showing it is not just like Elijah's cramming Elisha full of knowledge, but rather Elisha is an empowered member of a relationship, and one that was trusted to reciprocate in kind. That shows that there is a basis of respect, respecting someone else's dignity, respecting someone else's independence, that they are trusted to not just receive, but to provide. That's the key. Service of Torah is greater than learning, I think, and to your point, Steve, because it's not just unidirectional anymore. It shows what the quality of that relationship is, that it worked. That person was left at the end of it feeling empowered and generous, not just an extension of somebody else. So avot, what it really means to be an av, what it really means to be a conduit, right, of wisdom in life, leaves somebody in a position in which they are able to further it themselves. Back to the model of the Masorah. Masorah is not Moses handed it over to Joshua. Moses handed it over to the prophets. But rather, everyone who receives it then becomes their own transmitter. That's the key, is that it is a relationship that encourages and empowers based in fundamental respect of the other's dignity. Here we have another long comment from the Yachin, who is an 18th century rabbi, wrote a very beautiful commentary on Pirkei Avot. But I want to skip ahead a little bit and say, I mean, what he basically says here is something I think we've gotten from our discussion, is that why was it given, with this framing of the Masorah, of the transmission? Because it says derech eretz, which is the rabbinic term for ethical living. That's all they had before the Torah was given. Think about it. The Torah was given, it says, in the 26th generation of the world. So what did they have then to embody and actualize God's godliness in the world? Ethics. Derech Eretz is what Torah required so that Torah could come into the world. If there wasn't Derech Eretz first, then Torah couldn't come. That's what he claims. He says, and it's not just that Derech Eretz is some kind of like natural causation one to the other, but rather that it is very dear. Thanks so much for coming, Amy. Hope to see you again in the coming weeks. Glad you made it. And here is something that's really bold, what he says. Moses only merited to become the intermediary between Israel and God by dint of his refined character, because he went the extra mile. He really worked on himself. And accordingly, moral thoughts and ethical traits are the parents, the avot, which generate, or generate, think of like parents having kids, right? Which generate the keeping of the Torah. Ethics, like working on your character, working on yourself, the result of that is that it brings you to Torah, through which one perfects one's body and soul, completing what one must do for God and for human beings. So Torah flows out of ethics, is the idea here. Yeah, I mean, in a way, Susie was getting at what you were saying before. Derech Eretz is we saw before the metaphor of like it's the structural support of the building of Torah. Now it's being temporalized. Derech Eretz came before Torah because that's what they had access to before Torah was revealed. Right? So it's a continuum, though. Torah is a fruition of Derech Eretz. Derech Eretz is the Av. Torah is the Tolda. Very interesting, right? Now, one could think, it's so sassy, I love it. One could think that one could attain the world to come if one does not improve one's character. Yeah, I keep all the mitzvahs. What do you need from me? I keep Shabbos. I daven 3 times a day. I learn Daf Yomi. This is not so. No, you're wrong. The consequences for an undeveloped character are severe. Oof. It's true. It's true. The rabbi said that one who is a diligent student of Torah, but has not been faithful in their business dealings, right, has taken advantage of others, or does not behave kindly with other people. Woe unto them. Oi, oila, right? Woe unto them. Thus, the first Mishnah begins with the transmission of the Torah, right, the Masorah that we just saw, and concludes with they taught, right, these 3 teachings before: make a fence for the Torah, establish many students, and be patient in judgment, teaching you that the rules of ethical behavior are Torah too. And it was all received at Sinai. Pirkei Avot are the prereqs to what it means to become a real Ben Torah, a real child of the Torah, right? Somebody who is not just devoted to the Torah, but really sees oneself as, generated by it. And it further seems to me, and here's maybe something, maybe I'll lose you with this, that it begins with the transmission of Torah, because if there's no Torah, there's no ethics. So first he said if there's no ethics, there's no Torah, and now he's flipping it. He says also, if there's no Torah, there's no ethics. Anyone who does not believe in the Holy Torah and the self-disclosure of the divine, i.e. revelation, cannot accordingly believe that one or one's character are attended over, i.e. that the things you do are noted, I guess, or that the good one does is ennobling, or that it weakens the hold that nature has over you, or that the wickedness we refrain from is only because we're scared somebody's going to punish us. Now this is, this may be more like a fundamentalist point he's making. Listen, okay, fine, no ethics, no Torah. Oh yeah, we can all be good humanists. Beautiful. The basis of Torah, that is ethics. 19th century Reform Judaism was correct. But now comes, the pushback. Say, no, if there's no Torah, there's no ethics. Now, you can't actually have ethics without Torah. Now, you can take that in a culturally chauvinist direction or what have you, right? That you can't be a good person unless you keep the Torah. I don't think that's his point. Rather, he doesn't say specifically about anything particularly Jewish, but rather he says there's something that's ethically meaningful and maybe even ethically necessary about what it means to see yourself as being in a relationship with God. That's the key here, is that this actually, if anyone's read I and Thou by Martin Buber, the least popular part of that book, I think, actually accords with this. The third part of the book, which talks about God as this kind of triangulation between every dialogue, between I and Thou. Every interpersonal dialogue needs God, he says, because it's God that establishes the notion of relationship itself. And I think that's what he's getting at here. Ethics is only possible if you realize that even when you're alone, you're never alone. That everything you do impacts someone else. That you can see that as like the Santa Claus theological principle. He knows when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake. I don't think it's that kind of paranoiac fantasy. Rather that your life is meaningful. Your life is needed. Your life is noticed. God is attending to you. God cares about your life. Your life matters. Your working on yourself matters. And not just because it might get you farther in this rat race. You don't stop doing bad things because you're worried you might get hurt, because that's the kind of mentality in which you get away with it. Ethics is about more than getting away with it. It's about devoting yourself to what is ennobling, to what at the end of the day you feel proud of, because you have been empowered in that way by what you've learned. It's about holding yourself to a higher standard that has nothing to do, in a sense, with regard, and has everything to do with virtue. Right? This is, I think, the introduction of the notion of virtue. The Pirkei Avot is about, I think, actually, maybe to Amy's point, I'm sorry she had to leave before, but I think that what she intuited is quite apt. Namely, yes, not everybody's a chassid, but Pirkei Avot says, but it's the job of everyone to try. It's the job of everyone to try as hard as they can to be as good as they can. The Ramban is this notion of naval birshuta Torah, someone who's a wastrel within the domain of the Torah, right? Somebody who is like, yeah, technically they keep the Torah, but they're not admirable because they see the Torah as a license towards what you have to do and what you don't, and what you're not allowed to do. And anything you're not allowed to do, I'll do. But that's more than being a Jew, being a Ben Torah, being a child of the Torah, is remembering that all of your life is a gift from God for you to give as well. Torah is a transmission, so are you. You are transmitted and placed here lovingly. And now the question is, what are you going to offer? We can see ourselves as just subject to that, being on the receiving end. But as we saw before, Elisha washes Elijah's hands. We're placed here to then carry it on and carry it forward, for us to be a link in that chain and continue it into the future. I've had the privilege of being accompanied in this journey from the commentary of the Rav Soloveitchik. You can, if you want to try to find this book yourself, the book is called Halachic Morality, in which includes a number of essays about Pirkei Avot in it. I'm going to read his citation from his writings about this introductory framing, and I'll try to translate into regular English too. He says, it's very beautiful language, but it is very refined. There is a double aspect to Masorah. First, we have the formal halachic Masorah, which is, in its very nature, a dialogue tradition, i.e., between teacher and student. The master addresses his disciples, forgive the gendered language, and opens up to them the treasure of knowledge. Of course, a relationship of mutual love and respect is bound to develop, and it holds teacher and disciple firmly together. Like we were saying before, the relationship between teacher and student is, ideally a close one. You're grateful to the teacher, and the teacher is grateful to have you as a student, right? encouraged by that. Yet the relationship, although personal, does not transcend the bounds of objective attachment. The contact is not direct, but is established via the objective medium. Teacher and pupil have a common interest, i.e., what is binding them is that the teacher has access to a certain body of knowledge and the student wants that access. They have a common interest. The student wants to learn Torah. Great, the teacher knows how to teach them Torah. It's objective. The oral law is a very difficult and complex thought system, a cognitive method which requires many years of study. Right? This is about learning principles. You learn the principles of Torah, what it means, what it entails, the system. One must devote a lifetime in order to cope with both the texts and the abstract methodology. Torah is very hard. It's not something you just pick up. It takes, the path of what it means to devote yourself as a student. It's difficult stuff. But second, he says, there's the intimate personal Masorah. The medium of transmission is not the word, but an experience. So we already, I saw that comment before. It's from Sterling, if I remember. Before, I think a lot of us were getting at this. Wisdom is experiential. Masorah is not just objective, system, principle. It's experiential. It's personal. Avot, principle and person. But an experience. It's the medium of transmission, i.e., how you learn, is not just the word. It's not the hashtag content. Ugh. It's an experience, a state of mind, a mode of self-manifestation. Serving Torah is serving the person. The person becomes the text. Their life is the text you learn from. They embody what it means to manifest that wisdom. The Torah manifests itself in the unfolding of personal patterns. It finds expression in deeds, in personal resolutions, and daring experiments. Also, beautiful poetry. In moments of joy and despair, in meditation and states of ecstasy. In other words, what is the fully learned Torah? It's not just the words on the page, even though those are essential. It's the fully lived life. It's the richly lived life. And it's learning every aspect of that life from that's what the disciple is learning from the teacher. Not just information, how to live. And what's the data set? Life, how they behave. You are a role model, but not just a role model, because you're not doing it objectively. You're living, and they learn from you how to live. Yeah, I think that's right, Susie, is that not everybody is, not everybody is everybody's teacher. You have to find the teacher that you accord with, that helps, and again, putting the agency in the seat of the student, not just in the master, right? Or using that kind of very highfalutin language. Like the teacher and the student, right? You're going to resonate with some more than others because some are going to be ones that you're able to, in that way, learn from, right? Learn from not just the information, but from their life, from the way they live their life, the sensibilities. The personal realization is identical with Masorah. The student learns by observing and watching the gradual revelation of his master's soul in the most intimate and tender moments. Why did Elisha wash Elijah's hands? Because Elijah washed his teacher's hands. And his teacher washed his teacher's hands. He learned how to treat someone you're grateful to and someone you care for by seeing how the one he is grateful to is grateful. All of wisdom, like Torah, is passed forward. All of life is a Masorah. We learn to live, and then we learn to give. I wish that didn't rhyme so tritely, but it's true. We learn to live from those we learn from, and then we're able to offer that living to those who we encounter. It's a gift. And to the point now, and here's the rounding third base. V'shinantem levanecha, like from the Shema, teach them to your children, the words of Torah. Who are levanecha? It's not literally it's literally your children if you have them, but also these are your students. V'chein ata motzeh b'chol makom, and you find this in every situation, every person, every situation. She'talmidim kruyim banim, that disciples are called children. All right, back to Lauren's point, wisdom literature. Shema b'ni musar avicha, listen, my child, to to the ethics, right? The wisdom of your parent. Shne'amar banim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem. It's not just that we're children, quote unquote, to our teachers. That is a relationship of care, of attention, of what it means to empower someone to move beyond you. Right? Fly the nest eventually, to be bigger than you eventually. Give them everything you have so that they can give everything they have to someone else. But it says that we are children to God. The heresy of Christianity, in a way, isn't the notion that God can have a child. The heresy of Christianity is that only one person could be thought of as God's child. The truth is, we're all, like, what it means to be a human being is that we're the children of God. Everyone is a child of God. Not, again, in that kind of Christological way, but the notion that it's everybody is essential. So it's not just disciple to man. We are children to God, which means that we are learning also from God constantly. V'omer, and it says in Malachim 2:2 that the children of the prophets emerged. Were they literally the children of the prophets? No. Rather, they were their disciples. And from here we see that disciples are children. So Pirkei Avot, and I'll put a link to the source sheet in the chat in a moment. Pirkei Avot, we see it as, we saw the wisdom of our ancestors, the wisdom of our fathers, the chapters of our fathers, the aphorisms of our rabbis. It's true. That all is true. But I think here is the Pirkei Avot, the principles of what it means to be interpersonal. Right? This is what wisdom is about, learning what it means to be in this essentially interpersonal relationship, what it means to learn from others, how to care for others, and then to become one who then models that behavior for others, who then will learn from you, ad infinitum, v'chule, v'chule. Right, Pirkei Avot gives us the Masorah in the beginning, and it says, and have many, and make many disciples. Right, that was one of those too. Be patient, right? Be moderate. Be able to receive everything that's coming to you, weigh it judiciously. Make a fence for the Torah. Make sure you don't take full advantage of everything you have. Make sure that you anticipate what it means to give of yourself for others' sake. And make many disciples, i.e., know that Torah is not just something you receive, but something that you also transmit, something that you model, and something that you give fully of yourself. Pirkei Avot, because we learn how to become Avot ourselves and bring forth Torah and wisdom into the world. Shkoyach, a very exciting first step. We will be looking at the actual Mishnahs moving forward. We're going to be looking at the actual specific teachings, have no fear. And I'm very, very excited to have had this learning with you. We will be having our Parsha chat on Thursday evening at 7 p.m., same Zoom link. We'll be looking at Parshas Kedoshim, the holy ones. So we'll look at what holiness means. I think actually a nice complement to wisdom. Shabbos, we'll have Kabbalat Shabbat, 6:45, 7. And in-person Shabbos morning services, 9:30. Please register for that if you can come. Love to see you. We'll be moving shul outside again soon, hopefully, so we can take advantage of the fresh air. What else? And we'll be continuing with this class on Monday. Also, Bonfire. We'll be having our 3rd annual Rug Bomer Campfire Bonfire Kumsitz sing around. It's going to be a really great time. I hope to see you there. There will be a Facebook event coming out soon. It's also more information in the newsletter as well. So I hope to see you then. Thank you so much for joining, and have a great week.
Shkoyach, shkoyach.
Shkoyach.